Russian blogger, philologist in ambush, Sviatoslav Golikov, struggles to answer a difficult question. A typical question from a comrade in a private message. Listen, what do you think? Is all this just stupidity, or are they deliberately disposing of the Russian army? Putting aside thoughts on this topic, I will note this is not just a question from the ground, but from one of those very directions in which operational crises are developing for the enemy. In general, this is for understanding the actual price of our operational successes. The drone line project implemented by the enemy is currently aimed at knocking out a larger number of our active personnel than the troops receive reinforcements and, as a result, at the maximum possible reduction in the numerical disproportion between our and the enemy's ground forces. In achieving these goals, the enemy is directly assisted by the incompetent waste of our human resources. A huge mass of command personnel, from senior officers to battalion and company commanders, are affected by an ugly paradigm of thinking that absolutizes the principle of there is no war without losses, and in practice is expressed in the attitudes, no 200ths. It means you are fighting poorly. These will run out, new ones will be sent. Furthermore, the enemy is also making considerable efforts to improve the level of training of its infantry, including for offensive battles. In particular, as I mentioned above, the exercises are testing the introduction of mechanized and motorized units into battle immediately, without preliminary concentration. In conditions of high sparseness of combat formations, this technique can be effective both in active defense and in the offensive. Even in the current conditions of a shortage of infantry and a sagging defense in a number of operational areas, the enemy retains the ability to deliver very sensitive counterattacks, a clear example of which is the difficult situation that has developed in the Sumy direction. At the same time, in the event of a full implementation of the drone line project, the enemy will not only reduce the indicated numerical disproportion, but also provide conditions for deep counterattacks. Count on the fact that the enemy will collapse before he can provide himself with such conditions is, to put it mildly, irrational. Meanwhile, no systematic approach to solving the problem of fighting with meat has yet been observed. On the contrary, the top military and political leadership apparently is in a kind of dopamine trap. The current collapse of the enemy's defense only worsens the situation of distorted reality. Footage released by the Air Defense Unit of the Presidential Brigade shows a successful shoot-down of an Iskander-K cruise missile headed for Kiev. The first minutes of footage from police body cameras after the night attack in Kiev.
Давайте. Я перейду сама. Давайте. Перелозь. Я тримаю. Давайте. Сідайте. Держи за плечі. Вийшов. Вдвоєм не проскакуй, давайте.
Є хтось живий? Є хтось живий?
Яка дверь? Де? Чекай, дай. Обережно, стой, на голову впаде. Виходьте, Ваня. Чекай.
Евакуація! Виходимо з квартири!
Будинок палає, будь ласка, небезпечно дуже, виходимо. Хтось є ще в квартирі? Нема, там. Все, виходьте, будь ласка, давайте, не заважайте тут. О, є, виходьте.
The death toll from the Russian missile strike on Kiev has risen to 26, according to Ukraine's state emergency service. Among the victims are 3 children, including a 2-year-old whose body was found in the Sviatoshinsky district. At least 159 people have been injured, 16 of them children. Rescue operations are still ongoing. Indian state refiners have stopped buying Russian oil in the past week as discounts narrowed this month, and U.S. President Donald Trump warned countries not to purchase oil from Moscow, industry sources said. India, the world's 3rd largest oil importer, is the biggest buyer of seaborne Russian crude, a vital revenue earner for Russia as it wages war in Ukraine for a 4th year. The country's state refiners, Indian Oil Corp., Hindustan Petroleum Corp., Bharat Petroleum Corp., and Mangalore Refinery Petrochemical Limited, have not sought Russian crude in the past week or so. 4 sources familiar with the refiners' purchase plans told Reuters. IOC, BPCL, HPCL, MRPL, and the Federal Oil Ministry did not immediately respond to Reuters' requests for comment. The 4 refiners regularly buy Russian oil on a delivered basis and have turned to spot markets for replacement supply, mostly Middle Eastern grades such as Abu Dhabi's Murban crude and West African oil, sources said. Private refiners, Reliance Industries and Nayara Energy, majority owned by Russian entities including oil major Rosneft, have annual deals with Moscow and are the biggest Russian oil buyers in India. On July 14th, Trump threatened 100% tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil unless Moscow reaches a major peace deal with Ukraine. Indian refiners are pulling back from Russian crude as discounts shrink to their lowest since 2022, when Western sanctions were first imposed on Moscow due to lower Russian exports and steady demand, sources said. Refiners fear the latest EU curbs could complicate overseas trade, including fundraising, even for buyers adhering to the price cap. India has reiterated its opposition to unilateral sanctions. Trump on Wednesday announced a 25% tariff on goods imported from India from August 1st, but added that negotiations were ongoing. He also warned of potential penalties for purchase of Russian arms and oil. On Monday, Trump cut the deadline to impose secondary sanction on buyers of Russian exports to 10 to 12 days from the previous 50-day period if Moscow does not agree a peace deal with Ukraine. Russia is the top supplier to India, responsible for about 35% of India's overall supplies. Private refiners bought nearly 60% of India's average 1.8 million barrels per day of Russian oil imports in the first half of 2025, while state refiners that control over 60% of India's overall 5.2 million BPD refining capacity bought the remainder. Reliance purchased Abu Dhabi Murban crude for loading in October this month, an unusual move by the refiner, traders said. Nicaragua's government signaled its readiness to recognize Russia's claim over 4 Ukrainian oblasts currently under partial occupation, according to a letter Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega sent to Russian President Vladimir Putin on July 30th, local outlet L19 Digital reported. In the letter, Ortega expressed support for what he called Russia's heroic battle against Ukrainian neo-Nazism supported by NATO. If formalized, Nicaragua could become the first country to officially recognize Russia's annexation of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson oblasts, territories Moscow declared part of Russia in 2022. The language in the letter mirrors Russian propaganda narratives and echoes the Kremlin's justification for its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In a statement provided by Ukraine's foreign ministry, Kiev demanded that the Nicaraguan government refute the reporting. Should this information be confirmed, Ukraine will consider such actions a gross violation of international law, including the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, UN General Assembly resolutions, and Nicaragua's international obligations, the statement read. Ukraine reserves the right to respond in a manner proportionate to the unprecedented level of these unfriendly actions. Nicaragua has maintained close ties with Moscow in recent years. In 2020, it opened an honorary consulate in Russian-occupied Simferopol, Crimea, prompting Ukraine's parliament to approve sanctions against the Central American country. A year later, Nicaraguan officials signed a trade and economic cooperation agreement with Russian-installed authorities in Crimea. Nicaragua is also one of the few countries to vote alongside Russia in UN resolutions condemning Moscow's aggression, joining the ranks of countries like Belarus, North Korea, and Syria. The Kremlin's illegal annexation of the 4 Ukrainian oblasts followed widely condemned referendums staged under occupation during Russia's full-scale invasion. Despite the declaration, Russian forces do not fully control any of the 4 oblasts. Russia has consistently rejected calls from Kiev and its Western allies for an unconditional ceasefire, instead demanding that Ukrainian forces withdraw from the 4 partially occupied regions. Russia continues to occupy about 20% of Ukrainian territory, including the Crimean Peninsula, which it illegally annexed in 2014.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you want to support Warthog Defense, please become our member and get early access to new videos, exclusive members-only videos, and become administrator in comment section. The membership link is in the description.
Every day. We had a guy last week, it's 6 rescues in 6 days. You know, he's doing the job every day.